going to the front, calling it the defensive front seven, inside linebackers, edge rushers. So edge rushers, we're classifying, 3-4 outside linebackers, 4-3 defensive ends. For the most part, guys on the, it's self-explanatory there. And for D linemen, it's mostly, the interior defensive linemen. Um, so yeah, I guess I'll start with mine since mine was a little more controversial than yours, which is going to be for most of the list apparently. So you're all not going to see John for a second while I read off my top five. So obviously, as you see, if you're watching on YouTube, once again, shout out to John for making all these. So yeah, at one, I have Fred Warner of the San Francisco 49ers. Of two, I have Darius Leonard. Three, Miles Jack of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then four is Bobby Wagner, which I receive a lot of criticism for being low on him. And then five is Devin White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Don't mean to sound cliche, but for the most part, kind of like the rest of some of my previous rankings and our rankings going forward, it's a lot of preference, and and honestly, I don't really, I guess, I know we're not the only podcast that does rankings, but I think what I've learned is either people are like looking at other rankings and they're all very similar, and then or I don't know, a lot of people object to a lot of things, which I'm fine with. You know what I mean? I think we're both fine with. It's just do so nicely and objectively. But I'm bringing John back now, and I guess we'll go into John's. We'll go into your rankings first before I read some of the comments, if that's okay. So, all right, John, you're on the screen now. If you want to read off, or do you want me to read it off for you since you really can't see, or you already know it by heart?
I got it. I actually have it pulled up on my phone.
Okay.
So for me, obviously, my a little bit different. I went with more the established guys, which I mean, I talked about this in the last episode. I feel like the one concern I always have with my list is I'm going to be the person that was a little too late to the party with some of these guys, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm holding on a little too long for some of the veterans. Anyway, number one, Bobby Wagner. Number two, Eric Kendricks. Number three, Levante David. Number four, Darius Leonard. Number five, Fred Warner. As I said, I might be, a little late to the party, but I still think that Bobby Wagner and Levante David, two of those guys who are, veterans, probably, getting close to on their way out. I think they're still two of the top three linebackers. And I know a lot of people are, they kind of focused on you because of, well, actually, I can't remember. I don't think we had a ton of comments on ours for the linebacker one. It was mainly just like, where's Roquan Smith? But
That's one person, Roquan Smith.
yeah, but
he did not make it to the comments, by the way, that we're reading off. Sorry, Roquan Smith
anyway,
guy.
but I figured I'd get a little more hate because I didn't have Darius Leonard or Fred Warner in my top three. And I figured that most people kind of currently do. And I think those two guys are absolute monsters. But like I said, I just think that those veterans, if I had to pick one linebacker right here, right now, I'm going to take them. And I think that's because I love the experience that they have and just the different situations they've had to be in. Two of those guys are Super Bowl champions, which I know that a lot of people don't want to, include that when they talk about any position that's not a quarterback, essentially. But I think it's still valuable. So, yeah, that's my linebacker rankings. This was actually, like I said, one of our least controversial top fives that we've done so far.
I'll bring it back to us real quick because it's funny because we right before, I think a few days before you released that one, we had that as the only adjustment I think I made, at least late adjustment, because for the most part I made the list and I sent them to John, and if I wanted to make a change, I would have had to DM him a lot for the most part because my list would change in my head every day. But that's what I had. So for most of my list, that's what I have for the most part. But that's the only list I literally texted John saying, "Hey, change this guy out." And yeah, I was surprised because we were talking a lot about Eric Kendricks. That was like what you felt, or we both. I agreed too. I thought that we would get a lot of heat for because I didn't even have him in my top five. But no, for the most part, as per this Instagram comments, going with llama, penguin, two elite animals. He just at first he says Wagner, but he's just declaring that he's one of the best in the league. And then a few other people were kind of like Art Churchman said, he felt that Bobby Wagner was the best in the league. You had him at 1, I had him at 3. Only reason I have him at 3 is really he's still obviously a great linebacker. Just from what I've seen, watching the games, watching the film last year, I think it kind of showed itself with the way how Seattle's defense was. He's no longer I mean, he's no longer as good as he was Legion of Boom wise, obviously, and I think sometimes people still have that in their head. And I just think he took a step back per se, but it's not like a huge step back. It's just he wasn't as impressive and as good as in my eyes, as Fred Warner, and obviously Darius Leonard was in and out. But and I think it's important too to remember that linebackers, especially linebackers, I mean, it's such a short. I would love to see the statistic for a linebacker lifespan in the NFL because I feel like it's not very high. It's like probably lower, right after running backs. I mean, when you think
Right.
about it, it's a physical position. You're getting into train wreck or car wrecks all the time. And I mean, there's a reason why Bill Belichick has like 10 linebackers on his roster every year. That's because he knows it's a position that's going to wear down, and guys can get injured, and it's important to have good depth there. So, yeah, that in regards to Bobby Wagner, that's why I have him at 3. I almost put Levante David in there with you. My top 5, as it was just tough between him and Devin White. I was just felt Devin White was a little better, but once again, like we've mentioned, for the most part, I have no issues with John's list. I know his only issue with my list is no Eric Kendricks, which understandable. But all right, so you want to move us over to you want to read off your edge rankings, John? Well, I almost botched that one.
Yeah. So Edge was actually one that I think both of us got a lot of heat for. You more so because of, we'll talk about yours list in a little bit, but for me at least, the heat that I did get comes number one. I had Myles Garrett. I didn't get a lot of slack for that, but
Neither of us did really,
yeah. But
surprisingly.
after that, I had Joey Bosa as number 2, T.J. Watt number 3, Khalil Mack number 4, Chandler Jones number 5, and the main hate that I got there was Joey Bosa at number 2, T.J. Watt not being higher than him, and a lot of
Yeah,
people actually think that T.J. Watt should be higher than Myles Garrett.
yeah,
Um, just real quick to defend my position on Joey Bosa, I think he's actually one of the more underrated defensive linemen in the entire league. I think his spin move, his finesse, just all the moves that he has in his arsenal, I think is one of the more wide arrays. I think a lot of linemen in this league go for like the bull rush, the power stuff, just typical block sheds, getting around the guy. But Joey Bosa just he's silky smooth with those spins, and I love it. And also his arm length is just ridiculous to me. Like when I see that guy, his arms are so crazy long, and it makes him so disruptive in the run game.
yeah.
Um, so, I mean, I know that some of these guys have more sack numbers, but as as I think personally, and I think you agree with me, is that sacks are not everything. They are important, yes, but they are, at least in my opinion, a bit of an overrated stat because I think there's a lot of guys who can get really high sack numbers that might not actually be the best defensive lineman in the league, right? Um, I remember Robert Quinn on the Cowboys. He had like 14 sacks, and I don't think anybody would say he was like a top 5 defensive lineman.
Yeah.
Um, but it is what it is.
All right, so yeah, just go back to us, and then I'll go dive into my edge rankings right now. So let me pull that up. So yeah, mine had a lot more controversy. I had Myles Garrett 1, which once again no one really objected to. Big objection for me with most people, which I'll get into in a minute, was Chase Young at 2. And then I also had T.J. Watt at 3, and then Chandler Jones 4, and 5 was Nick Bosa. But once again, I put in the comments like, if John had asked me, who's your number 5 today, it would have been changed like almost every day. It would have been probably Khalil, or heck, even Khalil Mack. Like that 4 or 5 areas where it got real tough for me. But that's where Khalil, Joey Bosa also are in that conversation for me too. Probably, and once again, I have no objection if anyone else that has them any higher. I know my Chase Young at 2 is maybe a little premature, but it's just I just saw too much physical dominance out of him last season. He was just pure disruption, and he didn't have an off season either. People forget he didn't have a training camp, like this year or preseason, to fit into the NFL. And I think he missed the first few weeks too, with the groin injury. So I believe he started, and just kind of jumped into the league basically. And he looked like he not only that he belonged, but that he's going to be one of the superior edge rushers for the going forward, both in the run and the pass game. I mean, with and say this respectfully, he's just a freak. It's like we say about Ramsey. I think he's with the Myles Garrett type guys that are just built different. And yeah, I mean that's why I have him at 2. And like John kind of, John mentioned he's not, if anything, he's afraid to be too premature. I think we've seen from my rankings. I'm not afraid to be a little premature. Granted, I don't try to let recency bias, dial in too much because obviously, Nick Bosa's on that list and he was out all last year. But yeah, we're gonna read out a few of the comments. This one by Babol Jacob. He said the Neil Hunter disrespect is real. Um, and I'll let you go, John. Any reason why Daniil Hunter didn't make your list?
Um, I think Daniil's really good. I think he's right outside the top five. I think he's
Yeah,
in the conversation. But the injury, which this is another reason why I left Nick Bosa off. But to me, a guy coming off an injury, there's just too many question marks. Um, and so I leave them off for that, especially an edge rusher. You got to have a lot of explosiveness coming off the edge, and missing an entire year. It's just who knows what they're going to come back with. But also, I mean, even if he was healthy, I don't know. I think that before the season, like last year, if we were to do the rankings, I still wouldn't have had him in the top five. I think he would have been probably right outside of it.
yeah. I just think, yeah, I'm with you. Like, obviously, great physical specimen, but not as physically dominant as some of these other guys, and also not as technically sound as a Joey Bosa, where he has different moves to throw at you. So I'm with you. That's similar, very similar reasons as to why I did keep putting in my top five, like injuries. Not only last year, but just previous years, he's always had a few nagging injuries that have gone at him. So I mean, from hopefully he's added more weight to maybe help compensate with those injury issues. I think last year it was a neck issue too, which is a very serious issue too for any NFL player. I think if it was a neck. I'm not sure if I had that correct, but I believe he had a neck issue going in the last season. So that's why I didn't have him there. Then obviously, I'll just read one comment. PGO crazy. TJ Watt easily won. He's the most underrated player in the league. He wasn't the only one on the TJ Watt train. There were others, but I didn't get all those comments. So, John, why did you have TJ at 3?
I mean, TJ's a beast. I don't think he's one of the most underrated players in the league. I think he's properly rated. Like I predicted him to win Defensive Player of the Year last year before the season started. I think a lot of people did. I don't know how a guy like that can be underrated. But I had him at 3. I think that Myles Garrett, he's just the most well-rounded and dominant at everything. Like watching him against the Cowboys last year was just utter chaos. It was honestly, it was terrifying. They moved him anywhere on the line. They put him inside, they put him outside. He dominated no matter what. And I know this is edge rusher, but just that versatility, I think, is important. That he has the strength to go against interior. He also has the speed to go against guys on the outside. I like his overall move set more. I already talked about Joey Bosa. I love just the technicality that he brings to the defensive line position. And TJ Watt, I think he's a monster. But to me, the big reason why he's so dominant, I think, is his speed. I think he had the fastest time off the line, like from the ball snap to being off, the line in the entire league. And that's a crazy thing to have. He's crazy quick. But there was times in the year where I watched Steelers games and he didn't have an impact. And a lot of those times came after Bud Dupree got hurt. And so and I'm not saying that like he was carried by Bud Dupree or anything, because obviously he's better than Bud Dupree. But I do wonder how much of an impact he can have if he's the guy that teams are focusing on, like Myles Garrett is being, like Joey Bosa has been since Melvin Ingram has sort of, fallen off a bit, to where they're sending the double teams his way every time. Because there was a lot of times where he was dealing with single coverage or a single blocker because Cameron Hayward's inside and he's dominant. They got Bud Dupree on the other side, and he was racking up sacks. So
Stephon Tuitt too.
Stephon Tuitt had a crazy amount of sacks last year. So it was, they're blitzing linebackers up the middle. So there was just no chance that they could really double team someone or even give him like the Aaron Donald treatment where he's getting triple teamed.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go to mine. Yeah. It's very similar reasons why I have TJ at 3. Like, I mean, you hit it all really for me. It was just once Bud Dupree went down, he wasn't as disruptive. And I'm not, once again, I just want to know everyone, I didn't look at numbers for these. I'm going off, what I watched, and, granted my memory may not be perfect. Like I said, I've had to make a few revisions. But just I mean, especially in like John mentioned, and once late in the season when it all started kind of falling apart for Pittsburgh, and but Dupree went down, and TJ just wasn't as dominant, as you would like, and then also, I mean, it's a physical game, and he's just not the physical specimen that that Chase Young or Myles Garrett is for me, and I think anyone's, you put them all side by side, I think anyone would agree that those two are just the two guys I have above them are just physically, different. They're just stronger. I mean, probably as fast, maybe a hair slower, but it's more twitchier and explosive guys. So that's why I have TJ at 3 for me. And once again, very similar reasons as to why John has TJ at 3. So we're gonna go back down to D lineman, and John can get us into the the Chiefs and the offseason stuff.
AFC West.
AFC West. Jeez, I don't know why I'm blanking on that.
You're good.
Yeah. So I'll start off with my D line, top 5. I don't think we got very little pushback on these. Obviously, Aaron Donald 1, Chris Jones 2, DeForest Buckner 3. For me, Fletcher Cox was at 4, and then 5 was a real tough spot. I did consider Cam Hayward, like John just mentioned. I went with Jonathan Allen, but once again, like I said, if someone else put Cam Hayward, Cam. I keep almost saying Casey Hayward. Cam Hayward there. I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't be shocked. So, not much of really explanation. I mean, Cox a few years ago would have been at 3, but he's obviously, I think age is starting to hit Fletcher Cox a bit. So he's gone down to 4. He could easily keep falling down, but still be great. But really, DeForest Buckner was a surprise last year of how dominant he was because he literally helped change that Colts defense overnight. But all right, John, throwing it to you for your top 5. You can go ahead.
Obviously Aaron Donald at 1. It's undebated. If anyone thinks Aaron Donald's not number 1, if there was a list of just best defenders, Aaron Donald's still number 1. And if there's a list of best players in the NFL, he might still be number 1. So that's how good Aaron Donald is. Number 2, Chris Jones, just like you. Number 3, DeForest Buckner. I almost flipped those two because of how good the Colts were last year, but I felt like Chris Jones has just been doing a similar thing to the Chiefs defense for a longer period of time. So I kept Chris Jones at 2, Cam Hayward at 4, Fletcher Cox at 5. I did consider Jonathan Allen. I also considered Stephon Tuitt, but it just came down to Cameron Hayward. I feel like he was just more crucial and impactful to his team than Jonathan Allen to me or Stephon Tuitt. I mean, Stephon Tuitt's on the same team, so it's tough to pick between the two. But I gave the edge to Cam Hayward because he's just a beast in the run game. And then Fletcher Cox, I dropped him down to 5. I still think he's a monster, but I mean, it's the Eagles' offensive and defensive lines are sort of struggling from the same issue, and that's they're just getting up there in age. They're starting to see decline. And it sucks because, well, not for me because I'm a Cowboys fan, but, for Eagles fans because the trenches have been their 2 saving graces for a long time.
All right. So, yeah, only other comment really, maybe a little bit of pushback was another guy I considered, Akeem Hicks, who Ollie M6522 commented, he would put Akeem Hicks over Hayward. He basically, someone else commented with him, but he basically said he feels he's a top 5 interior defensive lineman. He was in consideration for me too. Once again, if I see someone else's list and they had Akeem Hicks, let's say in my situation there instead of Jonathan Allen, I wouldn't be upset. But I think Akeem Hicks is just in that like next tier lower than some of the guys that we're mentioning. Maybe not so a couple of years ago, but I think in recent, factoring in the past few years, he's kind of, as it's gone down. I think health's been a concern for him too. But yeah, so that'll wrap up our front 7 rankings and reactions to them. And now we can head on to what this episode is mainly about, which is the AFC West.